I'm very happy that we have a guest from Vienna who really knows a lot about the Austrian School of Economics. Who is familiar with the Austrian School of Economics? Please show up. Oh wow, okay. So you can ask me lots of critical questions. But and the funny thing is, in Austria, the Austrian school is not very well known. I think it's more known in USA and Costa Rica and Brazil. In Austria, it's, I think, not so. But there are some Austrians who still hold up the flag of the Austrian economy. And here's a real Austrian from Vienna, Rahim Taghizadegan, with his talk about denationalisation of money and cryptocurrency. Hey, Rahim.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. Wow. Wow. First lecture in the morning and about a theoretical subject, and I'm not speaking in front of an empty audience. I'm really amazed because honestly, I mean, most theory is useless. you should know by now. And I was asked to talk about an academic paper written in 1976 by a guy who undeservedly got the Nobel Prize for economics, which all of you know, I guess, is another big bankster scam. And he was partly wrong, or even largely wrong, in his paper, so I could stop here and leave it at that. But I won't, because I think there's some good theory to present, and I think there's a case to be made for good theory. What's quite interesting is that even within the most practical subjects, sooner or later, it's all torn apart by ideological struggles, and the cryptocurrencies are not an exception, just the case in point. And that's quite interesting. I think there are two reasons for that. First, ideas are really powerful driving force, and they make us passionate and persevere where others would be frustrated and give up. And on the other hand, you can't really escape theory, because those who renounce theory, and a lot of people say, well, we've read it all, we've heard it all, just not everyone has said the same thing yet. Those are usually slaves to bad theory, because there's nothing such as no theory. Theory just means reflection. So if you don't do, you might as well do good theory, and if you don't do theory, usually you just follow some bad theory which is unchallenged, unreflected. So Hayek was largely wrong, I'd say, in his paper. And still, I think it's one of the prime examples of good theory, because he had the courage to be wrong. And that's how you can recognize bad theory. It's people who know everything and got the answer for everything, and they don't even consider the possibility of being wrong. But Hayek himself made something very unusual. And I think it's the first time in an academic economic paper he ventured upon with a business idea. And he just literally wrote, if I was an entrepreneur, I'd do it like that. Now, of course, I don't know any other academic economist who's put his money where his mouth is, and Hayek is no exception to that. But he shared a business idea, and that's great, because most people won't do that. If it's a stupid idea, everyone loves it. If it's a good idea, everyone steals it. So you better keep it to yourself. And his idea was to launch a stable coin linked by a smart contract to a portfolio of commodities. He had a slightly different wording, but nonetheless, it was quite prophetic, this idea. But in order to really get the strong point of his theory, I need to go back to another major insight of Hayek, and it's not in that paper, it's in his other writings. And this major insight is that our thinking is constrained and shaped a lot by our evolutionary history as mankind. And most of the time on this planet, mankind has lived in small kin groups. You've all heard about the Dunbar number yesterday morning. So instinctively, we all have got this longing for community. So we assume that we need to form a tribe where everyone agrees on everything, and then we'll just try to convince other people and extend our tribe until it's the big global tribe. And of course, the more important the questions, the more important is that you make the right choice, and you need to agree on, and money is no exception. So most people in monetary history and theory assume There's like a good money, and we as a community who's using it, we should all agree on what are the characteristics of this good money. And the task of economists is maybe to persuade us, convince us what are the aspects we should look for. And Hayek thought that's a mistake, because money becomes really important in the great society, what he called the great society, and that's not a community. It doesn't work like a community. It has a totally different ethics of a community, and we've seen an exponential explosion of wealth within this great society, and it's a very recent phenomenon, and it's all due to international collaboration between people who don't know each other, who don't agree about the ends. They are just meeting on the means to achieve something. And I think that's a crucial insight because we are still most fixed in this mindset of convincing other people. And modernity was really challenging to most of us, with communities disappearing and this living in the anonymous foreigner society. The longing has become even stronger. So we've invested all this longing within one institution, that's the state or the nation. And that gives us the impression, or most people the impression, that we are part of a big tribe, which we need to influence and maybe convince other people. And that's what sets the stage for our economic well-being and so on. And I think it's a really pernicious idea, but it's understandable from an evolutionary point of view. Now, the market explosion of wealth is based on competition, and competition is based on the idea that no one knows best. And what's greatest about competition is that you can give two totally contradictory answers to the same question, and you can still be friends. And that's wonderful. And the more contradictory the answers, the easier is it to remain friends, because you're not direct competitors. So you can have really contradictory answers. And it may as well be that there's some convergence and the few may remain, but that's usually what we see in markets is choice, is diversity. I'm not convinced that it shouldn't be different for money or any other thing. And that was the basic and main insight of Hayek. And he has one other crucial idea in this paper, which I find immensely useful. Most about the debate about big ideas is because those ideas are really inflated, and usually it's the terms that we're using, like liberty, everyone is in favor of liberty, and everyone is in favor of justice, and so on. And I think it's the same with money. And a lot about the debates about money, which has been going on for a long time, is now, what is money? And it isn't money. And your money is shit. No, your money is shit. It's all like that. And Hayek, he exploded it all by just stating, well, what makes us so sure that money is a thing? We're using a noun in most languages because physically there was a moneta, but it doesn't make sense. Money is an adjective. It's just a linguistic artifact that we're using, and that fosters so much debate. And really, until now, most debates between economic historians and theoretical economists is really about this noun idea of money. It's one thing, and it must be one supreme money thing out there to find, to discover in history. And there are, I think, 3 major different schools, and they'll all pick out of history selectively what fosters their grand scheme of a money. But money, in fact, is better referred to as moneyness. It's a degree that can change over time. And different things, assets, relations, networks, may have a different degree of moneyness, changing over time. And it's another discovery procedure. And it may totally change. I mean, something that had no moneyness whatsoever may acquire moneyness, and I think that's a very, very useful idea. Now, Hayek thought, because he lived through the gold standard and this golden age of security in the Austro-Hungarian Empire for a while, he thought that in the end, maybe there'll be a convergence to one thing of supreme moneyness. And then there'll be the generally accepted medium of exchange, and it'll be stable. And then he lived through the time where the whole institutional structure of the gold standard came falling down. I mean, of course, it was pushed by government intervention, but of course, it was based partly on government intervention. But But the first thing that you realized once this institutional structure fell down is that you got the big issue of stability, because we still had, fortunately, international exchange, so companies, multinational companies really have a problem in calculating the profits and exchanging money around the globe. And Hayek thought, well, there's a big problem. It needs to be addressed, but it won't be addressed by convincing every a majority, a global majority, but by entrepreneurs. So hence this idea of improving upon the monetary structure by this certain stable coin. I think it was a wrong idea, and it turned out to be a wrong idea because the whole monetary market was already so distorted that what he thought would be the entrepreneurs, of course, were no entrepreneurs, they are no entrepreneurs, the banks. He thought it'll be a bank coming up. Of course, banks are part of a privileged cartel. They don't need to innovate, so they don't innovate. But there was some innovation, and the problem got partly solved for the really challenging multinational company problem, and a huge market emerged. It was the Forex market. But it was not banks, it was funds and swaps and derivatives and so on. Huge industry, lots of people making lots of money. So Hayek was right, and there's a problem, and it will be addressed. But it was a distorted market. It's even more distorted market. So it might take a different way. And it's not entirely sure if it's really a monetary answer, if it's by increasing the moneyness of something. It was a reaction to a symptom of something not working. So probably you had less short-time volatility, but without a measuring rod, all these national currencies now trying partly to be pegged to each other, all trying to be stable and have some kind of stability, in all these forex sectors and speculators trying to, of course, making money, but by that way, and that was how he realized they'd increase stability, which is a very sound and profound idea. But in the end, you could have short-time, little volatility with long-time devaluation. And of course, that's what happened, and it didn't come out of a stablecoin idea. You can't really fix the monetary system once the whole institutional structure comes running down. Now, Hayek may have been right in assuming, and most people assume, that there'll be a convergence to something which has the supreme moneyness and will cover all the different problems of enterprises. But I'm pretty sure without the government intervention, even prior to the gold standards and the establishment of the gold standards, we'd still see a much higher diversity. Because actually, during the gold standard, what's funny is that gold was hardly ever used in day-to-day exchanges. And I think without government intervention, we'd see silver, bills of exchange, checks, token monies, community credit lines, network monies, and so on being used in parallel. And of course, most of those things will eventually fail, be changed, develop. But I think there's no reason to assume that there won't be that diversity. Of course, there are some problems which need agreement, but usually they are provided by markets. And so I think one very pernicious idea is in the textbook of economic thought is usually that you define money as being a generally accepted medium of exchange. And of course, you in the crypto space, you've all heard, well, Bitcoin or crypto is never gonna be money because most understand generally accepted means everyone will accept it, and of course there's no way everyone will ever accept cryptocurrency. It's way too geeky, it wouldn't work that way, so it's no money. But it's a wrong idea. It's not a very good definition. It's the end result of a potential process of trial and error, of discovery through competition, and it's possible, it's quite possible that this converges to one remaining provider of moneyness, but it's not at all that likely, I think. So at the end point, there may be something more generally accepted, and things are accepted more generally at different stages of history and by different peoples and groups. And of course, it was already Karl Menger who understood what's this moneyness? It's marketability of goods. It's one of the major aspects of it, and marketability of assets, and saleability of assets. And it boils down to a theoretical insight that there are some goods and relations and maybe things or networks which have a marginal utility that's decreasing more slowly than the marginal utility of other goods. So there are some goods which people tend to hold on to and not say, well, I already got 99 bitcoins, that's fine, I like the number, keep your 100th one, I won't take it. With 99 apples, even 9 apples, even 2 apples, even 3 cups of coffee, marginal utility decreases a lot further. And it's a historical discovery procedure that people realize that some goods have marginal utility decreasing more slowly. And of course, theory helps to understand the distinct characteristics of that, but it won't tell us in future what will be discovered as having this unique ability, because one of the major insights of good theory of the Austrian School of Economics is the subjectivist theory of value. So you need to have a lot of empathy in future people and their future needs, and that's of course what's the great thing about the entrepreneur. You don't know in advance, but you try to anticipate with empathy what future people will use and what they'll understand and how they'll understand it and so on. It's a lot of paradoxical thing, and theory helps a bit to systematize and to be aware of what you're doing. That's theory about. You try to connect what you're doing with the experiences and the thoughts of mankind, of other people throughout history, and I think it's important for mental sanity, even if you're just a very, very practical person. And I think that's why there's a need for good theory. And most good theory will turn out to be wrong momentarily, because you can't really anticipate what's going on, but still be helpful. So I'm amazed at the paper which I initially, when I read it, thought, oh my God, it's just another monetarist tract. And of course, monetarism emerged out of this problem of the instability of forex exchange rates and so on. But by trying to pursue stability without building money from the ground up, I think the result was long-term instability, long-term devaluation, and it's only, I think, slowly we can try to understand what's been happening throughout monetary history. We are living in very interesting times in monetary history. There's nothing in the past quite like that, what's going on, and that's the challenge of good theory and trying really to follow what's happening and realizing what's happening. And the Austrian School of Economics, by realizing that money is a social phenomenon of not finding agreement and rational understanding in the community, but a discovery procedure between people who don't share ends and don't know each other and try to find means to cope with each other, they looked back in monetary history. And that's a very fascinating subject, and most bad theory just selectively picks out some episodes in monetary history. But monetary history really, I think, makes you humble, because you see so many different things being used and adapted, but still there are convergences, and that makes you optimistic that even though we haven't never been able to find any kind of ideological or religious agreement globally, and I think that's great. Luckily enough for us, we haven't found that. We can see there's a possibility of a convergence, not in a global community, but maybe in a global great society of people freely and voluntarily exchanging goods and ideas, and that's maybe the main basic idea and vision of the Austrian School of Economics, and those who follow the ideas of liberty. Hayek had another great insight. He said, most people in the field of politics assume that most people in the field of politics know very little. You need to educate them. They know nothing about money. They know nothing about institutions. And he said, what's distinguishing the followers of the idea of liberty is that they include themselves among all those people who know so little or next to nothing about the complex phenomenon of society. So you approach it humbly, and you may be inspired by Hayek to go and boldly fail where no one has failed before. Thanks a lot. Good luck.
Okay, wonderful. Very nice. So, I think you have some questions for Rahim, right? Please, go ahead.
Also challenges as well.
Challenging questions, please. Yeah. Who's? Ben? No. Ah, okay, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Very interesting talk, by the way.
Thanks.
Hayek was also known for his debate with Keynes regarding supply side, demand side theory of
This rap battle, right?
Yeah. So, although it was not the direct subject of your talk, if we do envision a world where cryptos take off and become a more widely used standard, how would you think that might unfold in terms of the supply, the monetary supply side? I mean, if you look at Bitcoin, it has a predetermined supply algorithm. Yeah. What do you see? Just comments in terms of the advantages and disadvantages of governments losing control of the monetary supply.
I think experience tells us that we can really trust government supply of money. And the monetarist idea that maybe you replace it by a computer, it's a great idea. But of course, you need to take into account the incentives of those people installing the computer and running the computer and so on. So it's one of the challenging questions. And I think one of the great innovations of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is trying to mimic something that is hardly ever understood, but I think is crucial. And that's that there are not only goods with marginal utility decreasing more slowly, there are certain goods where the production is limited by the fact that the marginal cost of production is rising more quickly. Because most products, if demand catches on, you just have economies of scale and you produce more, and the more you produce, the cheaper it gets. I mean, that's true for almost everything we find in supermarkets and so on, and that's the big explosion of wealth, really scale production. But there are still some goods which don't scale. So the more you're going to produce of them, the more expensive it gets. And of course, precious metals are an example. Keynes is among the many modern people who think that's a barbaric relic. And I think he's right. But with Hayek, I share the more humble approach towards the evolutionary nature of man. I say, well, we can try to change human nature. It'll be very costly. We'll try to convince people to change their nature. That'll be stupid and naive. We can take into account human nature and see that there is a longing, even though we may not understand it. I think theory helps us to understand what's really going on, that people tend to hold on to material things, and we are collecting species. We are really collectors. That's a barbaric relict, and some of it is neurotic, of course, because they're really things, the more you have, the more you want to collect more of them, and it can turn neurotic. And I totally understand the idea that it's barbaric, because it's, you take a hit in efficiency, in returns, and so on, by holding on to it. But why do people do it? And I think there's a truth ingrained in our evolutionary nature, is that we all know, even if it's unconsciously, that we age. And with age, our capacity to produce will decline. So it makes sense, I think, over your lifetime to hold on to. As long as you're able to produce, you try to hold on to something of what you produce, because you know in old age you'll be dependent. And then, of course, you can extend it in a transcendental perspective. There are people even holding on to, for religious purposes, they want to create something, build something, have something remain once they are gone. And I think there are goods that are destined to be collected because it doesn't make sense to collect like orange juices out of the supermarket and apples and things, but there are goods that you can collect, and it makes sense to think about them as a last layer or the first layer historically. So I think it makes theoretical sense that hoarding plays a part. I think maybe it's probably exaggerated, but due to insecurity. So one of the main other theoretical reasons for people hoarding is insecurity or uncertainty. That's the correct term. And the larger uncertainty, the more people will hold on to things. And it's bad, because uncertainty is not a good sign. But still, I mean, you can punish the people trying to do something voluntarily and reacting. That's always punishing the symptoms, and that's what politics is all about. So we have, throughout history, it's a fight against hoarding, and it's amazing, this continuity, this fight going on, and it's still going on, and I think it's a misunderstanding, because truly Keynes was right. Yes, it's barbaric, and modern investment advisors are right. Yes, it doesn't always make economic sense, and you can forego a lot of returns and so on. But still, it's a subjective appreciation of uncertainty and of senescence, of you becoming older. I think it's quite natural, so I'm more empathic or understanding of these limitations.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, please. You get a mic. You get a mic. Just a second. Oh, we get a new mic assistant. Hello.
Thank you, Henri.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice talk. Thank you so much. How do you value the money distribution process of Bitcoin, so the mining, in terms of maybe Hayek's view on this one? And because I think the distribution is very much key to further future adoption for our kids, for example. And I don't see these broad and widespread adoption now. And I talk to a lot of people and try to introduce how this new money system works based on code, but it's like too complicated for the younger people of our society, I think.
What's the question?
The question is, how do Hayek values the distribution process of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if we take his paper, I think he'd be very skeptical of Bitcoin. Honestly, I think but it'll be an informed critic, and he'll point the finger to some things which later on, of course, lots of people realized, and he'll be critical of the high transaction cost, and he'd be critical about the high volatility, and so on. But I think it's wrong-headed by Hayek. So, of course, I'm, as every good theorist, I must be disrespectful of the greatest thinkers in order to challenge them. He can't be here, so he can't really. Sorry for that. I try my best to make him appear here and challenge him. So I think that's a problem, yeah, and he's pointing the finger, and it'll be a problem, but it's the second best solution. It's not the best. We don't know what's the best solution. Maybe we'll never find another best solution, and second best is all we can get. It tries to solve an incentive problem, it tries to solve a trust problem, and I think in the end what we experience since the time Hayek wrote is that the trust problem is the larger one than the technical problem of distributing and providing services to enterprises, because there are financial services, a big financial industry, and they are coping with companies. Multinational companies are successful. They are coping with this world of changing exchanges and losing value of fiat money. So there are solutions to that. I think their third best and fourth best solution, and their price in the long term is too high. But you never know, yeah? There's a distribution challenge, and I think it's not the idea that you solve the distribution problem by mining. No, you solve the trust problem, you solve the, not even solved. I mean, you can't, even in theory, you can say solved. You tried to solve two other problems. And of course, only history will tell which are the more profound problems and which are the best solutions. If there are solutions out that solve other problems as well, quite possible. I think that there will be, but they won't solve those other problems. So there'll always be a trade-off. I think in economics, is what we learn, everything has a trade-off, and there's no best good for something. You always find out, oh, wow, it can't do that. Why can't it do that? I thought I bought the best one on the market, but it was a trade-off even. Either it's too expensive for what it offers, or it just doesn't offer the functionality what you need when you need it most.
Thank you so much, Rahim.
Thank you so much.
Danke.
Thanks. See you.